BB40 and Straight Black Pride, brothers and sisters. This is your brother, DC Radical 1, with another episode of DC's Radical Thoughts. And this is episode 14. And we're going to call this one Seeing Ourselves Through the Eyes of Our Enemies. And that's an idea I heard years ago. An elder brother who was like a jegna to me. We don't use the term mentor. And he said it, and this is probably 12, 13 years ago. He said, we got to stop seeing ourselves, meaning black people, through the eyes of our enemies. And there's so much of this taking place nowadays in so many ways. One of the most blatant and obvious ways that we never talk about is the proliferation of the use of the N-word in referring to black people, sometimes in referring to ourselves as black people. And we don't even understand that when you use that term to denote black people, you're taking a racial slur made up by our enemies, made up by people who hate us, and propagated by people who hate us, who encouraged us and have tried to encourage us to call ourselves that for literally 100 plus years. And Marcus Garvey was fighting against the use of the word for the last 100 years. And yet, in the last 40 years or so, a little bit less than that, maybe I'll say the last 30 years, that has become the standard vernacular for how we identify ourselves. I remember me and Brother Jenny were having a conversation one time, and we were talking about identity, and we were talking about how, you got people who, FBA, Black American, indigenous or whatever, and black people call themselves all these different things, Moors and this and that, Hebrew, whatever, all this stuff, right? All these different terminologies and identities, so forth, so on. And I told him, I said, the bad part is that none of these people, none of these different ideologies, identities, none of them discard or denunciate denounce. I mean, that's what I meant to say. Denounce the N-word, or denounce the use of the N-word, or denounce the N-word as an identity. So regardless of what they claim that black people are, regardless of their ideology, regardless of whatever identity they claim, in reality, they claim the N-word because they don't denounce the use of the N-word. They don't, I remember, of all people, it's going to sound crazy when I say it, that's my stream of consciousness. I remember that various people, this had to be the late 80s, early 90s, but various people, like civil rights people, and of all people, Jesse Jackson, who's normally on the wrong side of history, but he was there, and they were talking about burying the N-word. And this is before it became a thing that was just running rampant in our community. And because I wasn't even really using it at the time, I didn't see the importance of it. But yet here we are, 30 years after that. But they had a ceremony where, we're going to bury this word. And the people, it was hard, because at that time I was a teenager. It was hard for me to understand their staunch opposition to the word, because those people grew up in an environment where the use of that word generally preceded a threat of violence by a person who was openly racist, or preceded the actual violence by a person that was openly racist. And then sometimes that person was backed up by people who you may not have thought of as openly racist. But because that word was stated in a certain manner, people who weren't or didn't think of themselves maybe as openly racist immediately were alerted that it was time to put black people in, or the N-word, in their place. These N-words have got out of hand. I've yelled out N-words vociferously as a white person, and that's like, it's almost like, for those of us who are old enough to remember, it's like the Thundercat signal, right? You know what I'm saying? The N-word was like the Thundercat signal for white people to commit gross atrocities against black people, right? So people that grew up in that era, black people understood that. So the use of the word was taboo because what it was connected to. It was connected to gross physical violence against black people, right? But because of the media, because of, let's be honest, hip hop, starting with NWA and moving forward, who were managed by Jerry Heller, a small hat, it is what it is. That has now become, in essence, to a vast number of black people in America, our identity. So literally, we're seeing ourselves through the eyes of an enemy who popularized the word 100 years ago or more than 100 years ago, popularized the word and used it as a signal to commit brutality and atrocities, against black people. And now here we are in the 21st century, at a time where we're supposedly free, and we make use of this word to denigrate ourselves, to denigrate other black people, and oftentimes in this day and time, right? That word said in a certain manner proceeds gross violence against each other, right? Think about how many times somebody said something or somebody did something, the N-word gets thrown around, guns or knives get pulled out, and somebody is sent to the hospital or the morgue in the black community. There are no Europeans, Asians, or Arabs anywhere around unless you happen to be in one of their stores when this type of violence breaks out. And it's because at that moment, when that word is said, either one or both or two sides of black people have used the word in the same manner and spirit that our enemies used it 60 years ago, 70 years ago, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, right? It's the same effect. The only difference is there's no Klansman there. The Klansman is in the mind of the people involved, right? So now that person who's yelled this word, he sees that person that he's about to attack and brutalize and murder in the same way that the Klansmen saw black people 60 years ago. And we don't look at it that way, right? But that's just one example. But that's the primary example that came to my mind. But another thing that we see, another way that proliferates our seeing ourselves through the eyes of our enemies. How many times on these various podcasts, right, do we see men and women sit around and basically use the same stereotypes about each other that you'll hear from Europeans, right? Yeah, I mean, how many times you see some young black woman that probably, I mean, is not old enough to have even experienced life, and it's running around calling black men dusty and this, that, and the other, and the third, and so forth and so on, and use all this type of derogatory language towards black men. And then on the same account, how many of these podcasts that with you have men of various ages? That's the thing. Usually, at least from what I've seen, the women that are denigrating the men are relatively young. They don't have any life experience. Maybe you can educate them, but the men, a lot of times, is older men, and it's just using all this derogatory language and all these stereotypes about black women, and the whole. And I think Tommy Sotomayor said this talking about the hair hat thing, and women is B's and H's and baby mamas and all this stuff. And I mean, this is the type of language that when I was growing up, this was what the Reagan administration, you know what I'm saying? This is how they would talk about black women and welfare queens and all this old wild stuff. And when Clinton came in office and Newt Gingrich was the Speaker of the House, became Speaker of the House, you know what I'm saying? Like, these are the type of stereotypes that they would use. White Southern politicians, people that came from the middle of nowhere in America and were still carrying on the Klan mentality, right? Because Bill Clinton's from Arkansas. No disrespect, but to me, that's the middle of nowhere. Like, when I think of a European from Arkansas, and there's nothing you can do to convince me that person's not 100% racist. You can't convince me. You can't even convince me. This is me. Again, this is what, 30 years ago from Arkansas. You can't convince me that a guy from 1990s Arkansas don't have relatives that's part of the Klan. You just can't convince me of that. Right? Newt Gingrich, I forgot where he was from, but he's somewhere in the South too, this guy, right? These type of people would use this type of language, right? The welfare queens and calling women B's and H's, and that Spar had the radio show calling our women nappy headed hoes and all this stuff that's been going on for years, for decades, in the modern context. And the thing about it is, if you listen to some of these podcasts, right, where these guys get on and they complain about the women and this, that, and the third, and the same spirit, the same talking points, right, the same negative connotations and descriptions of our women, you hear coming out the mouth of black men, right? But it sounds like what I'm gonna call the Neo Klan, but everybody you see is black. But the mind of it, the spirit of it, is Neo Klan, right? And so, really, a lot of times on social media, especially, on YouTube, on this platform, you see, and especially with the whole gender war aspect of it, you just see both sides of the quote-unquote gender war, black men and black women, seeing the complementary gender through the eyes of our enemies. The entire red pill concept, the whole manosphere concept, and that whole thing, right? Which I've seen people who was supposed to be talking pro-black turn in that direction and start making content like that, because that was the new wave after Kevin Samuels, right? That whole concept, those talking points, all of that comes from Europeans. That's a European concept. This is stuff white men were saying about white women, and then black men picked it up and then start analyzing our community and applying that to our community and applying that to our women. but taking it completely out of the context of what black people have been through, right? Because my main thing is, in this discussion, how come we don't ever want to talk about sexual abuse? Like, I heard somebody say, well, black women always talk about trauma. What the trauma they talking about? They talking about sexual abuse, but don't nobody want to talk about that part, right? Nobody want, like, the way that we treat our women when they're young, we don't like to talk about how that plays into how they see us for the rest of their lives, right? I mean, I get a perfect example. A perfect example. And it's a horrifying story. A couple of days ago, or this weekend, I think, there was two young sisters in New York. They're twins. They're out at the bodega. They probably hung out, it's Saturday night or whatever. They hung out, they had fun, they do what young people do. Some guy wants to talk to them, whatever. They politely decline. Now, these sisters is 19 years old. This dude gets mad, leaves, come back, stab both of them. One of the young sisters die. Now, we'll sit around and talk about why black women talk bad about us, but Negroes is running around killing a 19-year-old woman who's, that's not even really, that's a college girl. That's not really a woman. She's lost her life because she doesn't want to talk to some dude who's probably, bruh, women don't owe us their phone number. Like, I don't understand even seeing it through that, but this is what it is. We have taken on such a European mentality that it's like, because I'm me, I'm a man, you owe me XYZ. And it's a sick mentality that I've seen evolve over the years, as from the time I was a young man, and I never understood it then. I don't understand it now. And it's just some type of sick European mentality where we see ourselves, again, we're looking through the eyes of our enemies at our women. And there was a time when I was growing up, you just protected women. Like, it's just certain stuff you didn't do. Like, dudes would really, when I was young, if a dude acted that way and said something, like, okay, well, you old stuck up B, other brothers would be like, hey, hold up, dog, go ahead, man, go ahead with that. And carry the dude off and talk to him. Like, come on, man, you tripping. Sure, they don't want to holler at you. Hey, chalk it up to the game. There'll be another good-looking sister coming his way soon. It always is. But this type of stuff, and I've seen it more and more. Maybe I just wasn't paying attention to it, and I've seen it in real life. Dudes start mouthing off and acting crazy. It just, again, we have become so inundated with self-hatred and taking on a neo-clan mentality without realizing it. And now you see it manifest in senseless murder and brutality of black people by black people. Like, we get up in arms about police brutality. We get up in arms about the murder of black people by white people. But the murder of black people by black people has been a problem since I was a teenager. And it can only occur if we are looking at each other the way the Klansman looks at black people. That's the only thing that would allow us to do the type of sick degenerate, horrific barbaric things that we're doing to each other in this day and time. And it's being fueled and reinforced with the music, right? I'm not even just gonna say the hip hop. I remember it was an artist a few years ago that I had heard a couple of songs that I liked, and I went and I listened to her music, and she's cussing and N-word. Now this is an R&B artist. She's cussing and N-wording and all this stuff, and I'm looking around and I'm like, when did this become R&B? R&B supposed to be love music. I thought you were gonna tell me make some songs talking about how you met some dude and y'all fell in love and he treats you right and this and that, and it was the exact opposite. So even R&B, you can't just say the hip hop. Even the R&B reinforces self-hatred, reinforces us seeing ourselves through the eyes of our enemies. The hip hop is self-explanatory. You ain't even got to say it. We already know. The podcast, right? We already know. The social media. If it's not the podcast with the men and the women, then you go on the Twitter. It's the FBA versus the other black people, including the other black people that don't like the FBA, that happen to be in America, and the whole anybody that does something that's cooning must not be from America, even though we know we've had coons in America as long as we can remember, right? And just all of this confusion and manifest self-hatred from us seeing ourselves through the eyes of our enemy. And somebody's going to ask me, well, what's the solution? I'm just be honest. Got a lot of work to do, and there's just a lot of people that's going to have to be left behind, because a lot of people, they don't want better for black people. They don't want to do anything positive for black people. They're out for themselves. They make content that's negative the same way the rapper makes music that's negative, because people are paying them to do it. And as long as people are going to pay them to do it, as long as it's going to be financially beneficial, as long as it's going to get them clout and popularity, as long as it's going to be beneficial for them on an individual basis, people will continue to propagate these negative stereotypes, these negative, push this negative agenda, push this self-hating agenda, push this anti-black agenda by black people. And they don't care about the ramifications. They don't care about how detrimental it is to us as a community. They don't care about any of that, because they're getting paid, they're getting likes, they're getting views, and they're going to continue to push the vision for our people of seeing ourselves through the eyes of our enemies. And those of us who want some type of liberation, some type of sovereignty, some type of self-determination, something better and more beneficial for black people, we just gonna have to leave that stuff and those people behind. And as the lessons used to say, or as the lessons still say, let them die in their own iniquity. That's where it stands. So with that, brothers and sisters, I thank you all for listening. Thank you, those of you on YouTube who check these out. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. This is your brother, DC Radical 1, and this has been DC's Radical Thoughts. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also follow us on our other social media platforms. On Instagram, we're at dc.radical1. On Twitter, we're at DC_radical_ONE. And the Cash App is $DC Radical 1. Again, thank you for subscribing. A beat before ODA, and straight